Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Naruto fall in love with Aayla Sakura, part 1, subscribe if you enjoy the video, let's start the story. Naruto Uzumaki's gaze was unflinching as he watched his opponent, augmented eyes seeing every twitch of his muscles, and every movement of his chakra. His opponent was one of the last two living members of Akatsuki, the organization of S-class criminals which turned his life upside down and tore everything he ever loved from him. 5 years, 5 long years of struggle and fighting, of loss and grief, of anger and hatred. Naruto had thought that it was over when he defeated the first generation, but Madara Uchiha was a truly twisted and conniving individual, and he had rebuilt the organization in the shadows after his supposed defeat, making his presence known when Naruto turned 18. The entire Hidden Leaf village had been completely unprepared when the Akatsuki attacked them directly. When they resurfaced, he had been elevated to the rank of Jonin, High Ninja. He was the next candidate to become Hokage, selected by the Sannin herself. Even he didn't see this coming, and the worst thing was that he should have. He had eventually inherited Jiraiya's vast spy networks and had become a master of the art to the point where Tsunade said the old pervert would be smiling down at him wherever he was. He should have seen this coming, but Akatsuki had completely avoided his network. Any of his spies who found even the slightest of information probably died before they could relay it. An S-class shinobi infiltrated Konohagakure no Sato that day and caused such havoc, taking so many lives just to get what he possessed. There was a reason why they were all considered S-class, S for suicidal. Unless you were considered an S-class shinobi, it was suicidal to face one, let alone 10. He could still see the partially collapsed Hokage monument, the burning corpses of the buildings. The faces, by the gods he could still see the faces. Faces of friends who had once been laughing, smiling, were ashen and lifeless, blood spattered over their final expressions before death. Naruto had made it his mission to hunt every last member of Akatsuki down and purge them from the earth. And he had done it. For 5 long years he had hunted, fought, and killed every member of that thrice-damned organization. He had found and destroyed the Jidomezu, nullifying Madara's dreaded Moon Eye plan and scattering the entrapped 8 Biju to the 4 winds. Every single one had succumbed to the last host's merciless hunt. Now all that remained standing between him and the architect was this man, one single man, a man who Naruto had once considered a brother, but now looking back he scoffed at the notion. His brother had died at the Valley of the End all those years ago, all that remained was a shell. His only craving was that of vengeance on the world. He had finally caught up to the two Uchiha. It would all end here, deep within the deserts of the Land of Wind, the great ruins of an ancient town surrounding them. A relic from a time after the sage separated and dispersed the Biju, when the Ichibi no Shikaku freely roamed the deserts, leaving trails of devastation once every century. This town was one of the relics of that time, and even after the great beast had been sealed, it had never been repopulated. It stood there, a reminder of a darker age. Sasuke Uchiha showed no emotion as he returned Naruto's glare. Once Sasuke was defeated, he would face down Madara and finish this feud once and for all. You're the last one. So it would seem. There were no words spoken between them, instead they both blurred through a set of hand seals, finishing at exactly the same time. Both shinobi were considered the best in the world, considered in the same league as the likes of Hanzo the Salamander and the legendary Sannin. They had even been likened to Madara Uchiha and the Shodai Hokage Hashirama Senju. Pain. Karakenden. Sasuke took a deep breath and exhaled a stream of liquid fire towards his opponent, the flames so strong that they combusted the grass between them. Naruto didn't even flinch, opening his seal to call upon the Kyuubi's chakra and use one of his own original jutsu. Ninpo. Ichibi. His chakra became visible, encompassing him like a mystical blue fire. His living energy twisted and morphed behind him, extending from his body in time to form a single tail of pure chakra. It writhed for a split second before circling around him in time to block the streams of flame. His tail shrugged the attack off before streaking forward at his command, embedding itself in the earth where the Uchiha once stood as Sasuke took to the skies in a chakra-propelled leap. Naruto rushed through the dying flames of Sasuke's fire technique, making the hand seal of the dog as he took a deep breath. Ton. Shinkyoku. He released the air from his lungs, infusing them with his chakra to create several compact bullets of wind. Sasuke saw them coming with the unnatural clarity of his activated Sharingan and twisted his body in a corkscrew, missing the strikes by mere millimeters. He landed in a crouch, skidding slightly across the dirt as he struggled to remain standing. Naruto was already rushing towards him, already going through the subtle changes of activating his Sennin Modo, his Sage Mode, eyelids changing color to a pinkish orange, eyes changing from azure to a noble golden yellow, and the pupils reforming into bars. Naruto cocked his right fist back, gathering chakra into his palm, and lashed out at Sasuke. The Uchiha was able to jump away, but watched in horror as the ground quaked and cracked when Naruto struck the earth. Sage Mode allowed the user to access the natural energy of the world, known commonly as Senjutsu, and dramatically increased their fighting ability. If that punch had connected, the Uchiha would have been reduced to a crimson smear on the ground. Fighting Naruto and Taijutsu was hard enough without adding Senjutsu, and the frog kata that came with it into the mix. In Sage Mode, going against Naruto and Taijutsu was akin to suicide, so instead Sasuke kept his distance, firing off several fire-based jutsu to keep the blonde off balance as he retreated. Before them was the ancient town hall, roof, and walls half collapsed. The Uchiha ascended the stone steps, unleashing a hail of fireballs to keep Naruto out of Taijutsu range. The blonde retaliated, firing off a swath of wind bullets at his opponent in a vain attempt to hit him. Naruto frowned as he cartwheeled and corkscrewed, dodging various low-level fire techniques before retaliating accordingly. Sasuke wasn't fighting at all like he expected. He wasn't using his Mangekyo Sharingan, and he wasn't trying to get close enough to use his lightning-based arsenal or Genjutsu abilities. Then what the hell was he doing? Leading him into a trap. It was possible. He knew Madara was around here somewhere. He could sense the immortal bastard's chakra signature, though he was doing an almost perfect job of hiding it. Nothing could properly hide when Naruto was drawing on the Kyuubi to augment his senses. Sasuke skidded to a halt, unleashing one last massive fireball, and disappeared through the half-destroyed double doors. Naruto frowned as he sidestepped the flames, stalking up the stone steps towards the entrance. He brought his hands together in a familiar seal, calling out the name of the first high-level jutsu he ever learned, Kage Bunshin no Jutsu. He created 10 clones and sent them into the town hall. 5 in through the main entrance, another 5 encircled the structure searching for others' exits. With ease the blonde jumped in a chakra-propelled leap, landing silently on the flat roof of the desert dwelling and entering the building through a shattered window on the second floor. The only light came from the outside. It was obvious any artificial light would have burned out years ago, and with the time of day the shadows made it hard for any regular human to see. Lucky enough he was not regular. In Sage Mode his senses were sharpened to near inhuman levels. In Sage Mode he could see in the dark as well as he could see in the day. He stood on a balcony, overlooking the expansive open space which was probably once the reception. His 5 clones had cautiously crept through the reception, only to be ambushed by the Uchiha from the shadows. Naruto guessed by his influx of memories that Sasuke had taken out 2 of his vanguard before they knew what hit them and was in the middle of fighting off the other 3 with Kusanagi. It wasn't long until the Uchiha whittled down the remaining 3 to 2, then 1, and it was obvious that the Uchiha thought the last one was the real one. Sasuke still underestimated him, even now. Sometimes Naruto wondered if his once friend and now bitter enemy even heard that he had spent the last 5 years hunting down the S-rank shinobi of Akatsuki and that he had taken them down. Oh sure, sometimes he had help in the form of Onion and Anbu from Kiri, Suna or AIM, but most of the battles ended in a one-on-one duel to the death. Though he couldn't take all the credit for killing Kisame, the Scourge of the Hidden Mist was a powerful opponent and it took the combined effort of him and Konan to bring the big man down. He had even given the Shark Man's sword, Samahata, to her as thanks. Come to think of it, he hadn't seen his fellow apprentice in a while. He needed to make a mental note to visit AIM. He pushed the thoughts down, seeing Sasuke on his blade through his last remaining clone, which exploded into smoke. Naruto took the opportunity, forming a Rasengan in each hand as he stepped off the railing and fell towards his wayward teammate. Senjutsu. Rasengan. Sage Art. Rasengan. Naruto slammed the 2 fully formed Rasengan into Sasuke's abdomen, watching as the Uchiha's face contorted in pain before the backlash sent him flying back, slamming against a pair of double doors made of oak and breaking through the strong wood, shattering the doors. Naruto sighed, deactivating his sage form to conserve chakra as he began walking. Sasuke wouldn't be beaten so easily, not in a million years. He honestly expected one of the Mangekyo techniques, like Amaterasu or even Izanagi, but found to his surprise, none came as he stepped through the remains of the oak doors. Within was a large chamber. The roof was half caved in, filling the room with rubble and debris. He saw the destroyed forms of tables and chairs. In fact, he put Sasuke through one of the last usable tables. He stopped in the center of the chamber, eyeing his opponent as he shakily got to his feet. Come on Sasuke. You can't beat me fighting like this. Sasuke spat out a gob of blood before he smirked, even after all these years you're still a gullible dope. Naruto arched an eyebrow, come again. Sasuke smirked and held before he blurred through a mass of hand seals and kneeled, slamming his hands onto the ground. You truly are hopeless Naruto. I led you here on purpose. Glyphs and runes began to appear on the floor, snaking across the broken stone tiles to form a circular ironclad trap seal, which stretched from one side of the still usable portion of the chamber to the other. Naruto smirked as the seal work, obviously the work of a master, which immediately excluded Sasuke. This was mainly because the young Uchiha was standing within the outer layer of seals and was trapped by the outer barrier. Unless you started researching Fuinjutsu, I'd say this isn't your handiwork. The Uchiha scowled at him, but Naruto continued, kneeling to the ground to run a hand along the central seal, a circle covered with elemental seals which surrounded him. This is the work of a true seal master. I'd say about Jiraiya's or my level. I suppose that means it wasn't your handiwork, team. This time the Uchiha openly snarled at him, which made Naruto chuckle. How he loved to rile the traitor up. It was one of his favorite pastimes these days. You'd be correct, Naruto. The blonde looked up at the owner of the voice, perfectly balanced on the remains of an old stone beam. Madara Uchiha hadn't changed his attire much over the years. He still wore that swirling orange mask over his face, his black hair was still short and messy, and his form was still completely hidden by that Akatsuki cloak. Is this your handiwork, old man? Madara chuckled lightly as he stepped off the beam, landing on the cracked floor, as if he hadn't missed a beat. Yes, it was. One of the strongest trap seals, even a Jinchuriki of your power, will be unable to break free from it. Naruto shrugged. Also means you won't be able to come to me. The ironclad trap seal is an S-rank technique in that while it imprisons the target, it also erects a barrier stopping anyone from entering. He looked at the two circles, each one the foundations of a barrier of invisible energy. He sighed in annoyance. This is going to take a while to release. The young toad sage made to reach for the massive storage scroll tied to his lower back, only to stop mid-reach when Madara chuckled. There's no need for that. I'll be finished long before you nullify the seal. Oh, Naruto was interested. What was the crazy old fool planning? So what are you planning? Why did Naruto? Madara eyed mildly. I thought you would have noticed by now. Take a closer look at the seal. Naruto frowned at the immortal, but shrugged and did as asked. He looked around him, his eyes examining every nook and cranny of the seal within seconds. A slight widening of his eyes was the only sign that he had noticed. There were extra runes and lines running throughout the seal, glyphs which he knew shouldn't be there. They served no purpose for the seal. Then he took a closer look and cursed under his breath. There was another seal under the first, just as intricate as the last. Look underneath. Naruto muttered his deceased sensei's words like a prayer before turning a glare at Madara. Are you out of your weight? Don't answer that. You are out of your mind. Do you even know what kind of a seal this is? He could see the mirth in the bastard's one visible eye. Yes, it is. Naruto grit his teeth before his eyes once again flashed across the expanse of seals he was trapped in. On their own these created a powerful entrapment seal. But the adage of these seals had never been tried before, at least not by him. The added glyphs were an over-exaggerated version of the seals used in explosive tags. This meant one thing. This was a two-way seal, one to trap him and the other to create a bomb. What is it? Sasuke frowned, touching the outer barrier only to be hit with an electric jolt. It's a two-way seal. Naruto answered for the elder Uchiha. One was a trap seal, and these extra markings are explosive runes, larger versions of the standard seals used in explosive tags. One of these would be enough to level a small house, but altogether it'll be enough to turn the entire town into one huge crater. Sasuke's eyes widened slightly before he turned a glare at his ancestor. Is this true? I'm sorry, Sasuke. Madara answered. Without the Jito Mezu we cannot extract the Kyuubi, and with the Biju freed there is no way we can complete the mission. The only way to survive is to remove the Kyuubi container. You mean the only way for you to survive? Sasuke spat angrily. You've betrayed Sasuke. Naruto chuckled sadly. Besides the situation he was standing tall and proud, arms folded across his chest. He did not fear death. His friends, family, and village were all dead. He would only be joining them. I have only two regrets. That I have to die with you, and I wasn't able to take Madara with me. Sorry to disappoint you, Naruto. Madara smirked under his spiraled orange mask before kneeling in a crouch, hands blurring through a set of hand seals. Another seal, this one an activation glyph, appeared at his feet with a long line leading to the main seal. He finished with lightning speed and slammed his hand into the seal. The glyphs began to glow a soft blue, running along the line and encompassing the entire seal. Sasuke looked down at the glowing runes in a mix of fear and fascination. Naruto just stood still, his eyes not leaving the Uchiha elder's single Sharingan orb for a second. Death at last. Madara nodded before his entire body began to distort and swirl, a sign that he had activated his teleportation technique, safely transporting him to a safe distance from ground zero. Slowly the glow intensified until it was blinding to even Naruto's augmented eyes. The last thing the blonde saw was an incredible bright light before he blacked out. The result was instantaneous. On a cliff ledge safely away from the town, Gaara, his siblings, and 3 Anbu squads watched on in horror as the ruins vanished in a huge explosion unlike anything anyone had ever seen. Before long a huge mushroom-shaped cloud of grey smoke filled the usually cloudless skyline. It would be another hour before the smoke cleared, leaving nothing more than a huge crater, full of crushed rubble and debris. It would be another 5 days of continuous searching before the search for Naruto Uzumaki's body was called off. Madara escaped the net of Anbu Suna had put up around the ruins, and he continued to be the main target of the onion divisions from every village for years to come. He was eventually cornered and killed in the land of rice by a united force of Anbu teams from lightning, water, sand, and rain. Irakage himself was the one who ended the Uchiha for his brother, for his adopted daughter, and for the kid who contained the Kyuubi. A monument was placed at the site of Naruto's death, naming all those who died in the world's war against Akatsuki. The names of the Jinchuriki, as well as those from every village who died, were inscribed on the 10-story tall marble memorial stones. In the center were the stone statues of the 9 Jinchuriki. Naruto's statue stood in the center, and on his plaque were messages from his surviving friends. Ayla Sakura walked out of the tent and stretched her aching muscles, failing to suppress a groan as she felt her joints pop. She had been stuck in that communications tent for the past 2 hours being debriefed by Masters Yoda and Windu. To be debriefed by the first and second masters of the GD Order was an intimidating endeavor and not something she would like to be in again anytime soon. She needed to get out of that tent and get a breath of fresh air. Though whether the air here was fresh or not was a matter for debate. Her friend and former teacher, Quinlan Vose, had said it best. Felucia was a burning death trap. The temperature during the day was staggering at between 60 to 80 degrees, except during the night cycle or heavy storms, where it was known to fall to -10. Her choice of attire was just right for this environment. At the moment she had chosen to wear a pair of skin-tight leather pants, a cut leather vest which left her arms and stomach bare, and a pair of knee-high black boots. Even with this attire it was still hot, and she was usually covered in sweat from her exertions before the day was out. She certainly didn't envy her clone troopers, boiling away inside those armored suits. She closed her eyes, took a deep breath, and opened them to see the stream of activity taking place around her. The base was being taken down and packed up. Her army was on the move. Clone troopers were loading themselves inside all-terrain open transports, AT-OTs, and the four-legged all-terrain tactical enforcers, or AT-Ts. All in all they were on schedule, and the 327th Star Corps would be ready to advance within the hour. The 327th Star Corps was a division she had been in command of for the past year, and they had fought many battles side by side. She had come to respect the clones of the division for their battle prowess, and she knew they deeply respected her for getting them out of scrapes where they would have died. The division's clone commander, Bly, told her as much after their first tour together. Aayla was hoping for the division to return to Coruscant after the Battle of Salakami for leave, but was denied and given a new mission. Originally the mission was to capture high-ranking separatist leader Shu Mai. But that had quickly changed just a few days after they arrived on the planet. They had saved a fellow GD Knight, Barriss Afi, who had reported that not only had Shu Mai left the planet, but she had planned to poison Felucia's water supply. Aayla reported this to the High Council, where she was ordered to remain and stop this crisis. Reports suggested that since the Confederation leader's departure the enemy strength on the planet was low and a few thousand battle droids and mercenaries with mid-armored support. For all intents and purposes it seemed that the separatists had almost abandoned this planet entirely, leaving behind an expendable token force to make it look like they tried to defend it. Ma'am, she turned to see her friend and confidant standing to attention right behind her. Bly was her clone commander, the second in command of the 327th. He had watched her back since she was assigned as their superior, and the two had become close friends over the years they spent together. Bly was fully garbed in his field armor, the once pristine white with yellow trim now chipped and scorched from combat. The division is ready to move out. All we are waiting for is your order. She nodded her head, very well commander. Tell the division they may advance. Yes, General, the commander replied, before leaning in a little. Are you alright, old scruffs didn't give you a hard time did they? She smirked at his statement. Bly had become quite protective of her over the years, heck half the Corps had become overprotecting of her. Anyone who even looked at her wrong would immediately feel the glares of at least 10 clones on their backs and another 5 slowly reaching for their blasters. Aayla was used to him calling the High Masters a bunch of old scruffs and it didn't bother her. Nothing I couldn't take care of. They just want to know when we'll be finished mopping up. Our offer is still open. Bly whispered in an almost conspiratorial manner. Aayla laughed at that. The offer was to barge into the GD temple, stun the entire High Council, and hang them by their feet from the Senate entrance, tempting, but no. The commander shrugged, it's still open. She sighed before changing the subject. Has Barriss moved out yet? About 10 minutes ago, General Bly replied. Don't worry she's in good hands. Of course she's in good hands, gal's with her. Aayla replied with a pout, turning around to survey the thick alien jungle before her. It happened suddenly. Her mind was assaulted by a mass of memories and emotions that were not hers. So many that it was impossible to filter them out, they were completely incoherent. Hands blurred up to hold onto her forehead. She let out a gasp and then a startled cry as the psychic backlash continued its assault. A few images became clear. An entire continent plunged into war. A woman dying on a sidewalk, shoulder-length hair of a strange pink, a hole in her chest from a powerful strike. She tried to speak, but her words were muted, lost. A young man, black hair, with onyx eyes which turned crimson, was ramming a blade of blue electricity through a young woman's chest. Her long dark hair framed a pale round face, and pupil-less lavender eyes stared in shock at her killer as death took her. The city in ruins, buildings burning, and streets littered with corpses. The man, hair black stretching down to the small of his back, pale white skin, purple pigment over his eyelids, and eyes a sickly yellow with slit pupils. 10 figures, their faces hidden in shadows, dressed in long high-collared black cloaks, red clouds adorning them. A man, dressed in that same black cloak with red clouds. Face hidden beneath an orange mask, surface covered in a swirling pattern. The only visible portion of his face was an eye hole, a single crimson eye staring intently. A large animal, fur a blood red, 9 tails writhing and twirling around it. It seemed to look right through her and opened its mouth to release a terrible, silent scream. The young man, human, dark blonde hair, azure eyes, tanned skin, whisker-like markings on his cheeks. He reached out to her with his right hand, mouth going through a set of silent words. "Find me." Aayla woke with a start, feeling a set of hands grip her shoulders and shake her. Slowly she opened her eyes to be met with Bly's worried face. His mouth moved, but she could not hear the words. They sounded as if they were being spoken in slow motion, just a mass of deep sounds. But slowly her senses returned to her and she heard his voice much more clearly. "General, damn it Aayla. Can you hear me?" "Yes," she replied, voice a croak. "Yes Bly, I can hear you. Are you alright?" The commander asked, face set in a worried frown as he helped her into a sitting position. Had she blacked out? She didn't know, but judging by her commander's reaction she must have. "I don't know," Aayla replied with a frown, right hand absently massaging her temple in a vain attempt to rid her of the lingering pain. "I think I had a vision, but it was strong, stronger than anything I've ever had before." The commander nodded. He had been around GD enough to know when they were having visions. Usually when this happens he wondered about their mental health, but until now this never seemed to happen to Aayla before. "Should I call a medic?" "No," Aayla replied, accepting his extended hand to help her get back to her feet. "It's nothing, I'll be fine. Find me." Her hand shot up to massage her forehead again. That voice, it was softer this time, but it was definitely the same voice she heard in her vision. She turned, ignoring Bly's worried glance to look over the alien Felucian forest. Mushroom-shaped trees reaching up to the skyline, barren landscape occasionally broken by the shoots of smaller vegetation she did not recognize. Something in those woods was calling to her. "Bly, can you take command for a moment?" she asked, knowing the answer before it left his mouth. "Of course," Bly replied in an unsure voice. "Then lead them to the rendezvous point," she ordered lightly, offering him a reassuring smile to try and negate his fears. Aayla should have known it would never work. "I don't think I should leave you alone after such a I don't know what it was." She waved him off. "I'm fine now Bly, but something in this forest is calling out to me and I don't think I'll get any rest until I find out what." Bly studied her for a moment before sighing in defeat. "The rest of them will have his balls on a hook for this. Can I at least convince you to take a squad of ARC troopers along?" She gave him a cheeky grin. "They'll only slow me down. This could be a trap you know." Her friend spoke up, unwilling to concede just yet. "A dark GD trying to separate you from us." Aayla closed her eyes and concentrated, allowing the force to flow through her. She sent it out in the general direction of where the psychic whiplash originated. It wasn't evil. It wasn't of the dark side. In fact it was faint and seemed more confused and scared than dangerous. "It's not a trap and don't even think about rolling your eyes at me, Bly. This isn't a trap." "Very well, generally," Bly relented, rolling his eyes anyway, just to let her know his opinion. Even though he had his helmet on he could tell she knew by her half-hearted glare. "But if you're not back by the end of the day I will send an ARC squad after you." She smiled before taking off in a force-propelled leap, shouting back, "I wouldn't expect anything less." Bly shook his head, bemused, before turning back to the column of Republic troops, a single thought leaving his mind. Maybe she should have left me one of her lightsabers. Aayla jumped from the cliff ledge, skipped across a small series of branches, landed on the ground in a crouch, and took off at a pace which would be impossible for any force-blind individual to duplicate. She rushed across the flatlands, slowing only to occasionally jump to navigate across any rocky outcrops or rolling hills. After nearly 15 minutes of running at a force-augmented pace she came to a stop, tired and panting. A GD knight she may be, but such usage of the force was a little much for her. Aayla was no Anakin Skywalker, though she wished she had his stamina and strength on occasion. After a minute of catching her breath she began to wander through the suddenly dense undergrowth at a more sedate pace. Volusia was known for its deadly wildlife, but she couldn't sense any dangerous predators in the immediate vicinity. Still she felt something powerful and foreboding. It was as if some influential creature was unleashing just a trickle of strength, keeping the other predators well out of range. Aayla didn't let this deter her though. The force was calling to her, almost demanding that she follow the signature, so she did. Finally she pushed aside a last barrier of branches and foliage, coming to a clearing devoid of any plants or wildlife. It was just a barren spot of land, maybe 20 meters across with a single large mushroom-shaped tree in its center. She felt something about this plant. The force itself was coalescing around it like a shining beacon. Timidly the young knight inspected the tree closer and saw that its purplish trunk was hollowed out, a meter-long sickle-shaped slice the only way in. Curiously she peeked in and gasped. There was someone in there. The slit was too narrow for her to squeeze through, so she reached for her hip where one of her dual lightsabers was clipped to her leather belt and slowly drew the cylinder. She ignited the weapon, feeling the heat emanate from the azure blade, before carefully cutting away at the opening. Finally it was large enough for her to squeeze, and closing down the lightsaber she began to edge through. Like many females of her race, Aayla had a lithe and slender build, meaning that she could force her way through narrow spaces easier with most others. Inside the hollowed trunk the force's influence increased tenfold and she felt slightly light-headed from the emanating power. The inside was dark, the only light creeping through the still narrow slit. Deftly Aayla raised her right hand and concentrated, allowing the force to extend through her arm and create a soft white light on her fingertips. It was then that she saw what was inside the trunk. It was a human, a young man about her age, maybe a year or two younger. It was difficult to make out colors in the dark, but she could tell that his hair was light, his skin was tan, and his clothes were colorful. Slowly the young GD knelt to inspect the man. She checked the pulse point on his neck and found that although weak it was still there. He was breathing, albeit his breaths were shallow and slightly ragged. Finally she checked this man with the force and gasped as great warmth flowed over her, as if she had been submerged in a pool of warm water. The disturbance in the force was coming from him. All of that raw power was coming from him. It was like a burst dam. She looked around and knew she had to get him out of this tree. She needed more space to try and heal him. Aayla was not a healer. She was nowhere near as well trained as Barris, but she was good enough to deliver first aid. Quickly she stood, reignited her lightsaber, and cut a much larger hole through the bark, easily large enough for her to drag this young human through. When that was done she grabbed a hold of his clothes and pulled. She cursed, he was quite heavy and she wasn't physically strong thanks to her slender frame. In combat she relied more on her speed than brute force. Finally she managed to drag him from the trunk and gently set him down on the forest floor. She fell into a sitting position for a moment, silently trying to catch her breath. The humidity of the atmosphere, coupled with her 15-minute force-propelled run, and her efforts in dragging this young man to open ground, had taxed her. She was covered in sweat and her breath was leaving her in quick gasps. Her master was right. She definitely needed to train more. As Aayla rested she took the time to study the human she had pulled from the tree. He was quite handsome. His hair was a shoulder-length mass of dark blonde spikes, framing a rounded tanned face. 2 sets of whisker marks adorned his cheeks, giving him an air of the exotic about him. While she was dragging him out, Aayla had gotten a good feel of his body under the clothes and found that he was well muscled. She had seen him before, but where? The vision, this was the man from her vision. His clothes were strange, a pair of dark green khaki pants and long-sleeved jacket with a sleeveless armored combat vest over it. On his feet was a pair of black sandals and tied around his forehead was a headband of black cloth, the metal plate adorned with a mass of swirling lines which reminded her of a leaf. Over his clothes he wore a long trench coat, red with black flames on the cuffs and hem, and a massive scroll had been attached to the small of his back, which she had removed and set to the side before she set him down. Taking another deep breath she kneeled beside him and leaning down, pressed the side of her head against his chest, hearing for his heartbeat. There it was, beating a little slow, but it didn't show any signs of convulsing. Releasing a breath she leaned back and felt his pulse again. It was stronger than last time and his breathing was becoming steady and continuous. Suddenly a hand shot up, grabbing onto her slender wrist with an iron grip. She gasped under the pressure and fearfully looked at his face to see his eyes open. Beautiful azure orbs with slit pupils looked around manically before settling on her. They widened in confusion and she guessed that he had never seen a Twi'lek before. She tensed, expecting him to strike. It was not unusual for someone in his condition to unconsciously lash out. Instead of attacking her or panicking he smiled a sad smile and spoke in a voice that slowly got weaker with every word. It looks like my luck has improved. At least the angel they sent for me is beautiful. She blinked at his words as he passed out and allowed a small smile to grace her lips. During and before the war she had undertaken many undercover missions for both the GD and the Republic and had been on the receiving end of plenty of such comments. But the men from before were usually sleazy underworld mobsters, mercenaries, slavers or enemy soldiers looking for a quick romp. This man spoke as if he was dying. She frowned. Why did he believe he was dead? His life signs were all stabilizing at an impressive rate. Reassured that the young man would be fine and would awaken on his own in a few minutes, she sat down, crossed her legs, and decided to meditate. Perhaps try and find an answer as to why the force had led her to this strange human. He was obviously force sensitive, as his very aura seemed like a beacon of energy to her senses. He didn't have the taint or heavy spiritual pressure of dark Jedi or Sith. The grunt of pain was her first indication that he was awake, and she opened her eyes to see this strange human sitting up, hand reaching up to rub his forehead. He didn't notice her, for his eyes were closed. Damn it, never expected to get a hangover in the afterlife. She frowned at his words. He really believed that he was dead. Slowly he started to get up, only to stagger when he made it to a knee. She moved to stop him with a worried glance, slender hands grabbing hold of his arm to anchor him. Easy there, you've taken a bad knock. The blonde flinched under her grasp, but she refused to remove her support. Gently Aayla set him down into a lying position again. He tried to open his eyes, but the light was too much for them, and he hastily shut them, groaning in pain. She smiled, opened them slowly. That's it. There we go. Slowly Naruto opened his eyes, flinching under the harsh sunlight, but refusing to close them. Blotches assaulted his sight, and it took a minute for his eyes to adapt. He looked over at the woman kneeling beside him. Her voice carried a strange accent to it, almost enchanting to his hearing. But when he saw her he jumped in surprise. She wasn't human. She was tall and slender, dressed in skin-tight leather which left her stomach and arms bare, as well as giving him a nice view of some cleavage when she bent over to inspect him. Her skin was a dark shade of blue, cerulean maybe. The perfect face, full midnight blue lips, chocolate brown eyes, but the thing that surprised him the most was that instead of hair she had two long tails, extending down to the small of her back. Who are you, what are you? Naruto asked as he flipped to his feet, a kunai flying into his grasp thanks to the wrist-mounted storage device he held. The woman in turn jumped back through what looked like a chakra-propelled jump and fell into a defensive stance, a slender right hand reaching for a cylindrical device on her left hip. She gripped it tightly, brought it forward, and flipped a switch. A blade of pure blue energy came into existence with a snap hiss. Naruto frowned as he studied the weapon. He had never seen anything quite like it before, but he knew instinctively that it was deadly. He brought his kunai in front of him, falling into a defensive stance before this beautiful, yet strange alien creature. Please calm down. The woman seemed to plead in a strange, enchanting accent. I do not wish to harm you. He watched as this strange ethereal creature came down in a crouch, shutting off her weapon and placing it on the ground. She stood up, took a few careful steps back, and raised her hands in surrender. He looked at her for a moment, wondering what she was playing at, before nodding her head and copying her movement, setting his kunai on the ground. Look, lady, he said suddenly, hand reaching up to scratch the back of his hand as he gave her a sheepish smile. You're not an angel by any chance, are you? She gave him a look like she was wondering about his sanity. No. Why do you ask? So I guess that means I'm in hell. Not that I'm aware of, she muttered, suddenly sounding a little offended. He flinched slightly, usually when he heard that tone with a girl he was on the short list to a good ass kicking. She made no such movements. He looked up and azure eyes met dark chocolate. They stayed like that for the longest time. Two opponents sizing each other up, then the woman sighed and spoke in her richly accented voice. You were disoriented, confused. She explained. I thought you were going to lash out at me. Naruto didn't lax on his guard. He had been met with many over the years who said they wished him no harm, yet tried to kill him anyway when he was within range. So he had a wind-based jutsu ready for deployment if she became hostile. Instead she did something that surprised him. She advanced until she was within 2 meters of him and then sat cross-legged on the ground, looking up at him imploringly. Naruto stared at her for a long moment before copying her gesture, sitting cross-legged on the ground 2 meters away from her yet remaining silent. Ever since the annihilation of Konoha he had been forced to learn many things about the outside world. But after a moment he took her form again, eyes wide with the surprise and shock he felt when he saw her a few moments ago. The woman, definitely a woman, saw his widened eyes and shocked expression and smiled a little nervously. I take it this is the first time you've seen someone like me before. He nodded dumbly. Ever since he had tamed the Kyuubi no Yoko, the 9-tailed demon fox, he had seen some incredible and terrifying things. He knew there were other intelligent creatures in the world. Orochimaru snakes, Tsunade slugs, the toads of Mount Mamboku, the demon fox clans who inhabited the dense forests of North Fire Country, only to name a few. But he had never seen anything quite like her before. His younger self would have panicked, flailed his arms around, and demanded what she was. Basically make a complete idiot out of himself. But with age came patience, and with age came the ability to control your emotions and keep your mouth shut. So who are you?" he asked at last, might as well start from the beginning. She looked at him for a moment. "You first." Naruto frowned at her. "I asked first." The woman seemed to think for a moment. "I'll tell you what. I'll answer a question, and then you answer a question. Will that do?" Naruto thought about it for a second and shrugged. "Alright." The woman smiled at him, and despite the situation he couldn't help but return it. "My name is Aayla Sakura, GD Knight." Strange name, he found himself saying. "And what is a GD Knight?" She raised a hand with a mischievous smile, index finger wiggling right and left. I answered your question, now you answer mine." Naruto Uzumaki, former Jonin of Konohagakure no Sado." She stared at him for a moment before bringing her hand up to her mouth, covering it as she giggled. "And you said my name was strange." She started before her features fell into a thoughtful expression. "Hey, alright, it's your turn. I don't want to be rude." He started, scratching the back of his neck nervously. "But what are you?" She smiled, placing a hand against her chest. "I am a Twi'lek, native to the planet Rylith in the Outer Rim territories." Naruto blinked, both confused and bewildered by her answer, which left far more questions than answers. "Twi'lek, Rylith, Outer Rim, what are you talking about? You've never heard of any of this before?" Aayla asked, genuinely surprised, unless he was teasing her. Almost everyone knew this information. Besides humans, Twi'leks were one of the most widespread races in the galaxy. There were populations of her people located on thousands of planets from the core worlds to the furthest reaches of the Outer Rim. Her people were nowhere near as widespread as the humans, but she had thought that almost every being in the galaxy had at least heard of them. "Nope, first time hearing any of this." Naruto answered a little sheepishly. This only cemented his opinion that he was not in the deserts of Suna anymore. In fact, he had never seen anything remotely like the mushroom-shaped trees surrounding them. He knew that the collection of seals Madara used to destroy him were unstable. In fact, many seal masters had surmised that mixing two such high-powered fuinjutsu would be too dangerous to even try. Not even Orochimaru was mad enough to attempt it. Then again, the blonde had always wondered about the Uchiha's sanity. After all, what right-thinking individual would think colliding the moon with the earth was a good idea? Maybe the combined seals were not as explosive as he thought. Perhaps they created some kind of dimensional shift, throwing him from one reality to another. Alternate realities were theoretically possible. A stone in a stream created ripples. A different choice would lead someone on a new path. "If I remember the rules of this little session, then you've already taken your turn." She frowned at him. "No, I haven't." "Yes, you have," Naruto pointed out with a mischievous smile. "You asked me if I've ever heard of your people or whatever else you were talking about, so it's my turn." She glared at him for a moment before sighing in defeat and waving to him to continue. "What is a GD Knight?" The GD Knight is a rank for GD in the GD order. When an apprentice or Padawan learner is considered ready in the eyes of his or her master, they would go through a set of trials, and if they passed they were given the rank of Knight. Aayla explained, seeing understanding in the blonde human's eyes. And what is the GD order?" Naruto asked. He guessed these GD were some sort of warrior organization, like the shinobi from back home, and a knight was considered a similar rank to a chunin-level shinobi. Aayla raised a delicate eyebrow, the only sign of hair on her body, he thought. "It's my turn." He scratched the back of his head sheepishly. Sorry. Go ahead. "What is a jonin?" "It's a rank of warrior in the village I was originally from. Jonin is short for high ninja, or high shinobi. It is one of the highest ranks, and those who carry it are considered elite warriors." Naruto answered. Twi'lek frowned a little, but nodded, allowing him to take the next question. "What is the GD order?" Lai frowned as he looked over the expansive forest from the cliff face. The column had been on the move for an hour before the weather took a turn for the worst. It started off as an increased humid breeze, then suddenly, and with very little warning, it began to rain. The rain was sudden and torrential, freezing cold drops of water pelting his armored suit. Odd how he hated this planet. Felucia was a world of unpredictable weather. It could be hot and humid, with no sign of rain for weeks or even months. A rainstorm could come suddenly, usually only lasting an hour or two, but on the rare occasion it could last days and become so heavy that it would kick up vast masses of mist. The commander had been in this hellhole for a month and he still hadn't figured out this jungle world's weather patterns. He wasn't even sure what season it was. Soon the pelting rain was joined by jagged strikes of lightning and near-deafening crackles of thunder. Before long the ground was soaked and slowly becoming a quagmire. His troops and machines were slugging through it, but it was a slow and arduous pace. If the separatists took the initiative and attacked them now, they would be at a disadvantage. Eventually he called for the column to halt and weather it out. The offensive against the separatist holdings had to be put on indefinite hold. Scouts were sent into the forest to keep watch for either separatist forces or their wayward general. He had not heard from Secura since she had taken off into the jungles, and he was becoming worried. Lai had tried to raise her on her personal communicator, but something in this storm was jamming communications, and all he had received was static. He couldn't even contact Commander Afi and the ARC troopers he sent ahead. They were on their own too. Commander, he turned to see one of his ARC captains, Briggs, standing behind him, fully garbed in his advanced recon armor, complete with red stripes along the helm, arms and legs, and dual blaster pistols holstered to his hip. Standing behind him was a line of 4 ARC troopers, the blue stripes representing their rank as lieutenants, hands holding the compact scoped Wester M5 blaster rifles. It's been half a day and she's not back yet. Do we have your leave? Lai frowned for a moment before nodding his head in agreement. Go. Bring her back before the storm ends. Yes, sir, the captain replied, and with a nod to his men took off into the hazy Felucian jungle. The storm had come suddenly and without warning, drenching her and her strange companion from head to toe before they were able to find shade under one of the larger mushroom-shaped trees. Slowly the storm got worse, and a light mist was starting to take shape, making visibility less than 20 meters. Aayla sneezed and began to rub her sides with her hands in a desperate attempt to get warm. The raindrops that hit her skin were freezing cold. She let out a breath which became mist and was just able to stop her teeth from clattering. Her leather clothes were soaked, meshing against her form and making her feel naked. Her skin was glistening from the rainwater, like she had been unceremoniously dunked into a pool. Funny how barely an hour ago it was boiling, and now it was as cold as Arctic tundra. She spared a glance at her companion. He was soaked to the bone but didn't seem to care. His head was raised, azure eyes taking in the sudden dark storm clouds which blocked out the alien sun overhead. Water dripped from the edges of his blonde spikes in rivulets, matting them against his head, and continued to run down his face. "Come on," Naruto's voice surprised her, and she turned to see him halfway inside the trunk of the tree, using the opening she cut just a few minutes before. "It's freezing out here. At least here we can stay dry." She nodded, followed him in, and sat down at the other side of the tree, watching him set his huge scroll against the wall and lean against it, eyes closed as if he were about to fall asleep. She wasn't fooled though. A crackle of thunder seemed to explode from overhead and she noticed him flinch ever so slightly. It seemed Naruto was a little afraid of thunderstorms. Aayla shook herself, sending droplets of water flying from her glistening form before leaning against the wall and closing her eyes. She felt cold, tired, and weary. Wishing that she had more clothes with her than what she had. She should have listened to Barris, going on and on about wearing a cloak or putting on some of the modified armor Bly made for her. Suddenly she felt a weight on her and creaked open an eye to see Naruto's trench coat draped over her like a blanket. Naruto was kneeling beside her, looking at her for a moment before standing and walking back to his place at the other side of the trunk. She smiled at the small gesture. So he was a gentleman. Unconsciously she curled up, wrapping the coat around her, and before she knew it she was fast asleep. She must have been tired. Barely a minute after he covered her with his coat, Naruto heard the light steady breath telling him that Aayla had fallen asleep. He wasn't surprised. When he awoke she looked tired. He saw bags under her eyes and weariness in her gaze, which meant that she hadn't slept well in a long time. Naruto looked through the opening, saw the storm worsen, and heard the continuous pelting of the rain. He sighed and wasn't going anywhere in a hurry. Even he wasn't crazy enough to leave this shelter in the middle of such a storm. It made the ones he went through in Konoha look like pretty decent weather. Resigned that he was stuck here, he decided to study this strange alien woman across from him. There wasn't a lot of room in the trunk and their feet were nearly touching. He had to admit that she was very beautiful, even if he had never seen anything quite like her before. What had Aayla called herself? Ah yes, a Twi'lek. Her face, relaxed in the bliss of sleep, was serene and beautiful, not a single blemish on her cerulean skin. Her mouth was partly opened, showing a glance of her white upper teeth. She snored, but it was soft and soothing, mainly breathing, exhaling, and inhaling from her mouth. She was very slender, with long legs which seemed to stretch for an eternity, a flat stomach, flawless complexion, and a pair of mounds which seemed a little over a handful. He sighed, shaking the thoughts from his head. The skin-tight leather she wore left little to the imagination, but somehow he was still able to conjure it up. He half-heartedly cursed his deceased teacher for partially corrupting him. Naruto stayed up most of the night, keeping watch, watching the rise and fall of her chest, and listening to the soft sound she made in her sleep. She was mesmerizing to look at, and he bet Jiraiya, God rest his soul, would have tried to recruit her for his research once he got over the initial shock. He chuckled at the thought. Eventually the rain stopped, and after a moment to make sure that the storm had truly ended he stood and made his way back out into the open. The sun was peeking through the slowly dispersing dark clouds, and it looked like it was going to be a hot day. When Aayla woke the sun was creeping through the opening, and the continuous pelting of the rain was gone. She sat up, wiping the gum from her eyes before stretching her muscles. Aayla was surprised by how tired she had to be to fall asleep like that and chided herself for knocking herself out in the presence of a man she did not know. For all she knew, he was a separatist spy. She stood, folding Naruto's long coat as she walked over to the opening and peeked outside. There he was in the middle of the clearing. Aayla noted the katana in his hand, his stance, and the way he carried it. He had stripped down to his pants and a black shirt, and for the first time Aayla took in his physique. The muscles were lean, telling her they were gained through hard work instead of the sterile environment of a gym. He was sweating from his exertions, the odd trickle flying from his hair and skin every time he made a sudden move. Naruto had been training for a while. He was obviously a practitioner of sword fighting, something which outside of force organizations like the GD or Sith was quite rare. She watched him begin a set of forms, movements graceful and light like a dancer. He spun, ducked, and danced as if he were fighting an invisible foe, his sword swishing and blurring in a series of slashes, stabs, and strokes which were done with such finesse she considered he would be a match to quite a few GD battle masters. Gently she stepped through the opening and sat down, content to watch him go through the forms of his sword art. It was an art she was unfamiliar with and was intrigued as she watched him go through the stances with ease born of practice. Finally he stopped, finishing his form and sheathing his sword in a quick motion. He was panting heavily, but he was smiling. Did you rest well? Yes, thank you for the coat. He smiled as he approached her, telekinetically grasping the towel hanging from a branch beside her and sending it drifting towards him. Naruto caught it with ease and looked at her with a wry smile. He was confused about something though. That's an interesting ability. I'm a telekinetic. She explained as she rose to her feet, studying him. I've heard of those. You can move things with your mind. He said as he wiped the sweat from his brow. Yes, Aayla replied, still noticing that something was wrong. He wasn't very good at hiding it. She doubted those expressive blue eyes could hide anything. But underneath she felt a maelstrom of confusion and uncertainty. Naruto, what's wrong? What do you mean? He asked, a little guardedly. I'm also an empath. Aayla explained, and upon his slightly confused look she sighed. It means I can also read emotions. You feel troubled. He sighed, and it took a moment of silence before he answered. Aayla had only known the man for a few hours, and the questions and answers session they shared only added more, well, questions than answers. But she felt through the force that he was a good man, strong and brave, with good intentions to anyone who met him. But she also felt that he had been hurt badly in his life, not physically but emotionally. Everything is so confusing to me right now. I'm guessing that I'm not in my homeworld anymore, yet I don't know where to look or even if it exists. I suppose I can say that I'm scared. He chuckled sadly. Nah, scared isn't the right word. I'm terrified. You're in a strange place, with people you have never met from races you've never seen. Aayla spoke up, her voice soft as she rose to her feet and walked over to him. Everything around you is of the unknown, and it terrifies you, am I right? He looked nervous, almost like he was about to bolt, but nodded his head. I'm not going to lie to you, Naruto, she continued, placing a hand on his broad shoulder. He was a full head taller than her, which was rare considering she was quite tall herself. There will be much out there you will not understand, and it will frighten you. But I'll make you a promise. I'll stay with you, be your guide, and help you find a way home. Okay. He nodded, a small smile gracing his lips. Thank you, Aayla. She grinned, you're welcome. Her head suddenly darted to the right, just as a group of individuals came through the thick underbrush, wearing some kind of white armor, colored stripes adorning the surface. One, with crimson stripes on his helm and arms, stepped forward and saluted sharply. There you are, ma'am. You made us worried there for a moment. Captain Briggs, Aayla greeted with a smile and a nod before looking ever so slightly guilty. I'm sorry, I sent you and your men on a wild chase, didn't I? The captain nodded before his helmet turned in Naruto's direction. And who is this? He's that disturbance I decided to look in on. Aayla replied, don't worry, he's not a separatist spy. Just a young man a long way from home. Very well, General Briggs answered. He was obviously not convinced but was going to follow his commanding officer's orders. I'll just tell the commander you're alright. Aayla nodded before turning back to Naruto. Let's go get your stuff. Naruto nodded, turning around and allowing his new acquaintance to lead the way back to their tree. Within a minute he had picked up his summoning scroll and was being escorted back by this strange woman and her elite ARC troopers. It was all kind of surreal. These men, their armor, their weapons were all alien to him. He wondered how these black objects could be dangerous. There were no blades or any sealed tags on them. Maybe this was because he was a shinobi and his kind fought in the shadows and on high ground, attacking from different angles and striking from the most obscure places. He didn't bother to look at a regular army and how they fought and deployed. Shinobi fought their own wars, their own battles. He heard a small whistling noise and turned his head to the captain. Noticing him sling his weapon and reaching into his loincloth, pulling out a small disc-shaped object and flicking a switch. A small figure appeared, maybe between 10 and 20 millimeters in height. It reminded him of that holographic jutsu the Akatsuki used to remain in contact with. The figure spoke, voice raspy. "Execute Order 66. It will be done mildly." Naruto suddenly felt a very bad feeling settle in the pit of his stomach. Unconsciously he reached for his right thigh pouch, pulling out a couple of kunai and imbuing them with wind chakra just as the soldier deactivated his disc and unslung his weapon. Briggs walked back in line, shared a look with his fellow troopers, and calmly nodded his head. As all five unslung their weapons and held them at the ready. Pointing them at Ayla's back. "Watch out. Thanks for watching my video, see you next time, till then sayonara."